Well, let me throw it open to anyone then. One of the ideas that the ambassador alluded to is that there's some sphere that the courts are just not competent to go. On the other hand, I think there is a consensus on this panel that you, or maybe there isn't, that you don't want to leave it just to the executive. So where is the place of Congress, and is there, anybody want to chime in on whether Congress has been inexplicably acquiescent here? Have we lost the legislative branch?
Let's talk about the Military Commissions Act then. And I always come back at the questions of what is the role of each of the co-equal branches of government from the perspective of international legal obligations. And how do we assure that we are not only in compliance, but capable of being in compliance with those international legal obligations? I still believe that international law is part of our law, and there should be no doubt that there is a role for all three branches of government in enforcing and determining the content of federal law. I'm not a constitutional expert, so I can't draw a line through using prose to describe where the boundaries are between one branch or another. But I am absolutely certain that if we have international legal obligations, if we are serious about adhering to international legal obligations, then it is important that those who work in the realms of the executive and the Congress and the courts be apprised of what those international obligations require of us. So I'm not going to answer the question directly, simply, I think, to be honest, out of ignorance, because I'm not a constitutional scholar about where the boundaries are among the three branches. But I think we have a precedent problem, a pre-existing problem, and that is that for a long time now, none of the branches of government have been sufficiently attendant to the content of the international legal obligations that the United States is bound by. There is an insufficient amount of attention being paid, an insufficient amount of knowledge available to those who make the decisions in the executive, in the legislature, and even in the courts, because the courts have gotten some of this stuff wrong as well, of what is the scope of application of the laws of war? What is the scope of application of international human rights law in armed conflict or to matters taking place extraterritorially? What does the law of war have to say about the status of detainees? The court in Hamdi seemed to suggest that the United States was involved in a kind of armed conflict that the humanitarian law of international armed conflict applies to when it comes to Al-Qaeda, because it said, well, obviously we have the right to detain individuals. The fact is that it's only the law of international armed conflict that has explicit rules for detention, because in armed conflicts that aren't between states, that are involving, say, rebel armed groups, it is the presumption that domestic law will provide the rules for detention and to challenge detention. These niceties, I think, were lost on the Hamdi court, but then in Hamdan, contrarily, the court said, well, Common Article 3 applies. Well, Common Article 3 is for non-international armed conflict. And I think there is some disconnect here, even in the highest sources of our jurisprudence, about the very fundamental question of what is the legal framework that we are applying to the people that we detain. So I would like to shift the question that you asked, Joe, a bit to the need to provide greater sophistication among all three branches of government on the questions of what are the applicable legal frameworks to any particular situation and how they may or may not overlap, instead of the question of what is the relative competence of the three branches of government.
Well, did you want to respond to that? Because, okay, then I'll come back and put another question to you, Professor.
Okay. One, I don't think that there is... I don't think that we've lost the Congress. I think that the Congress has a legitimate role, because what the Congress does is legalize or allows the president or bestows the president for certain legality for action. I believe that the executive branch will act. I think that what Congress does is make it legal. And I think what the judicial branch does is evaluate it, and either after that's taken place and either says it was legal or excuses it. If we look at what happened during the Japanese internment, I think it was the Korematsu case, what the judicial branch did was said, okay, well, this may have went outside the bounds of the Constitution, but it was used by virtue of necessity. So we've always seen the role of the judicial branch as being one that has evaluating behavior as that has already occurred, and then making a determination as to whether or not it fit within certain legal parameters, whereas the Congress acts, I would say, in the first phase. Okay, but the action is going to take place. I think that your questions underscore, the questions that you have underscore why the judicial branch and the legislative branch are not properly suited to answer these types of questions, and why it is up to the executive branch. I don't think that they want to have the responsibility of answering the questions that you all have presented. I think that what the judicial branch wants to do is they want to acquiesce during times of war and say, hey, Judge, one thing the judge doesn't want to do is be responsible for another 9/11. Congress doesn't want to sit around and deliberate over details of what do we call the detainees, because they don't want another attack. So what they want to do is say, hey, to the executive branch, that this is your thing, you know, take care of it. And I think that that is where we see ourselves today.
Well, let me. Did someone want to jump in?
Just one quick point. To that point, people forget that in December of 2001, there was a 3-day full Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on these precise issues, where on day one, Michael Chertoff testified, on day two, I testified, and on day three, Ashcroft testified. And we gave just a full briefing on all these questions to Congress. And, you know, I'm not going to be critical, you know, because I need to get confirmed again someday. but really, they took the information and left it at that. So they were aware of some of these questions that were out there, and the questions regarding the legal framework, and perhaps it was a situation where, as you're saying, this is complex, we'll leave it to the executive branch.